So one of the most amazing and touching aspects of our two trips to the Middle East, to Jordan, Israel, Palestine, and Turkey, was how the ancient ancestors in faith connected to the present. Our Jordanian guide spoke about these ancient ancestors as if they were alive just yesterday, as if they were just talking about his great-grandfather, that may have died just before he was born. He talked about it, and he would point to the hills and he'd say, that over there was the Canaanites and the Jebusites over here, and the family of these ites and this ites, as if they were still alive and present in his life. He spoke of them as blood brothers and sisters of his family tree. Today's scripture is about Jacob's struggle. And I told you a little bit to remind you to place where Jacob fit in this genealogy. There are three wonderful stories of Jacob, and all of them are about Jacob cheating. And these stories demonstrate how and why Jacob deserved the name cheater or manipulator, because that's what his name is. The first story is about Esau, the older brother, and the older brother, we're told, had very hairy arms, but that the younger brother, Jacob, was more fine-featured. Esau was more like his father, rougher in complexion, and Jacob was more like his mother, fine features and complexion. The older brother, Esau, was supposed to get the inheritance. So one night, Jacob perhaps got his older brother drunk and laughing and joking, and Jacob manipulated his brother Esau to give up his whole inheritance, his whole birthright, for a bowl of oatmeal. Well, actually it's porridge, but this is oatmeal. Can you imagine giving up your whole birthright, your whole inheritance, just because you're hungry for a bowl of porridge? That's exactly what he did. Then he cheated his father. He cheated his elderly father, Isaac, when Isaac was old. He was groaning with age. He said, I'm blind, I can't see, I can't hear well. I want to give my last blessing before I die to my oldest son, Esau. Because you know, with twins, there's always an oldest, and Esau was born first. So therefore, he would get the blessing. But no, the conniver, the cheater, worked with his mother, and Jacob disguised himself as Esau, because the father could not see, but he could feel. So he put on skins so he would feel all hairy. And he talked like him, and he went in to get his blessing. And that's exactly what Isaac did. He gave Jacob the blessing because he thought it was Esau. And then it's time for him, when Esau found this out, he wasn't real happy about it. In fact, he was angry, and he tried to get revenge on his brother. So that's when Jacob runs away. He crosses over the Jabbok River, which means wrestle river, into the neighboring territory, and he ran all the way to his uncle's place. He ran away from the anger and the revenge of his brother Esau. And thus we meet Uncle Laban. Now, Uncle Laban had two daughters. He had Rachel and Leah. Well, Jacob was supposed to marry Leah. But Leah was not as pretty as Rachel. So he asked Uncle Laban, could I please marry, what would it take for me to marry Rachel instead of Leah? And he said, well, if you work for me for 7 years, you will be allowed to marry Rachel. So it comes to the 7 years past. Now it's the wedding day. Rachel, he believes, is all dressed up in her wedding garments with a veil across her face, and they get married and go to the marriage tent. And the next morning, when the veils are off and it's daylight, he realizes this is not Rachel, this is Leah. So the cheater got cheated. So then he says, what would it take to marry Rachel now? So he still has Leah as his wife. What would it take to marry Rachel? Also, 7 more years of labor. Now we come to where we are in this scripture, 21 years later. Jacob has not changed. He's fundamentally the same cheating person, but he decided it may be time to go back to his homeland. And there's probably some selfish reason for wanting to do that. I'm not sure, but he was a little scared. He was a little frightened. So he decided that he would send his brother Esau some gifts, like 200 sheep and 10 rams and hundreds of goats and some camels and some servants. You get the picture, a whole lot. And he sends them ahead, and he even sends his wives ahead. Now here's a guy that's afraid of his brother, but he sends his wives ahead. So that night, after crossing Jabbok, but not quite entering into the land, he's safe. Everybody else is gone. He camps by his tent by himself, and he tried to go to sleep. I'm not sure exactly what happened that night. He couldn't sleep. He was really nervous. It's like when I can't sleep on a Saturday night when I'm going to preach the next day. I don't know. He was very afraid about meeting his brother. So that night, inside of himself, he started wrestling and struggling and turning and twisting, and he started dreaming. He didn't know if it was a dream. The dream seemed so real. Was it real? Was it a dream? In the middle of the dream, he was wrestling, and he found himself struggling. Was it with an angel? Was it with a man? Was it with God? Was it with his conscience? He was wrestling, and this old angel, tradition tells us, Scripture didn't say that old angel, that Jacob pinned down one hand of the old angel on the other hand of the old angel, and the old angel playing games with Jacob in the middle of the night in a dream. Finally, Jacob pins this old angel. And the old angel said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "My name is Jacob." And the entity says to him, "I will bless you. From now on, you will be called Israel," which means let God rule your life. Let God rule your life. So there becomes this huge symbolic change from Jacob to Israel. And then the angel whacked him on the hip, and Jacob stumbled out of the tent the next morning with a limp. Now, what's the meaning of this story? Well, many people say that the meaning of this story that was told over and over again in the Bedouin tents near the Wrestle River with the blowing winds and the shifting sands, that the meaning of the story was to explain how the Jabbok River got its name. One night, Jacob had a wrestling match with God or an angel of God or his conscience on the edge of the Jabbok River, and that's how the river got its name, Wrestle River. Or other people said that the purpose of the story is to explain how old Uncle Jacob, how old grandfather Jacob, how great-great-great-grandpa Jacob had a hitch in his walk. Why? Well, one night an old man Jacob wrestled with an angel, and angel slapped him on the head. And some people say the story text explain how a great altar got built at Peniel. Why was there such a large altar in this kind of stuck away, hid away place called Peniel? Jacob built an altar that night to commemorate his wrestling match. Or the real meaning of the story is this, that in that tent on that night, Jacob had a wrestling match with God, with an angel, with his conscience. He had been cheating and manipulating people all of his life. Anytime there is a change in the name in the Bible, means that there is a large change in the relationship between the person and God. Also an inward change. Now, what does all this stuff have to do with you and me? We don't live in Jordan or Palestine or Israel where these people are, we don't feel that same kind of connection, the same type of story that you share around the family table. I mean, we share these stories, but not in the same way. For me, it's the question, how do some people struggle and wrestle with some major event in their lives and come out whole of heart and sure of soul? What is missing in the lives of those who seem to slog through life, sure that tomorrow would be worse than today? Kind of like the character of Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh stories. They're sure that tomorrow is going to be worse than today. Every one of us, everybody in the world has stories of grief. Stories of depression and despair and hopelessness and sorrow. Some of those situations we have survived well, and others we didn't. And even though some of those that we survived well leave their mark, just as Jacob was left with a maimed hip. Every spiritual revelation known to humankind is based on the bedrock of hope. Embedded in each is the spirituality of hope, and hope is built into struggle. Hinduism sees life as the gathering of races that leads eventually to the eternal dissolution of each of us into the energy of God. Buddhism teaches the path of enlightenment to the end of suffering. Judaism lives in the life-giving law of God and waits for the Messiah who will turn an unjust world into the eternal glory of God. Christianity embraces the Paschal mystery, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, the movement of life to death to life. And Islam awaits the transformation from physical burdens of this life to the spiritual freedom that comes with submission to God. But embedded in each one of these spiritualities, this spirituality of hope, and each of is a spirituality of hope that gives its followers the power to believe in life, to cope with life, no matter what the burdens, the struggle, the wrestling that comes with daily dyings of life. Each of these major spiritualities has a story of struggle and hope that these great traditions have preserved. Jim and I moved to Iowa in 1995. We lived in Nashua, and so we were part of at that time, the Waterloo District. Now, I had not been following much about the war with the Serbs and the Croatians and the Bosnians. It wasn't until I moved into that area that I realized the story of the Bosnians, because in Waterloo, so many of the Bosnian refugees have been resettled there. Not as the first place, but often as the second place. And so even the notifications about school being delayed or the openings, It was written in English and in Bosnian. Everything was written in 2 languages. It was my first time experiencing that. And it's hard to imagine a bleaker place on earth than Bosnia in 1992. Ethnic tensions, centuries old, had flared again in the ancient region. Protestant Serbs, Orthodox Croatians, Sunni Muslims battled for national political control under the banner of religious freedom. Long established, an ethnic identity, brutal torture, and ethnic cleansing flourished in every segment of its population, while one group tried to contain the others. One segment of the society drove the others out of regions that had been integrated for years. Kind of like that village in Uganda. Integrated. Jews, Muslims, Christians. Neighbors forced neighbors from family homes and homesteads generations old. A history of bitterness long thought gone raged again and deepened. Hope for any kind of peaceful coexistence ebbed by the day. The fighting was hand to hand, street to street, man to man. It was bloody. It was a hopeless time. Vedran Savlovic was a Bosnian. He had been born on November 11th, 1956, right in the heart of Sarajevo. The 4th of 5 children in a highly musical family. Vedran himself became a professional musician, a cellist who played everything from symphonies and chamber music to folk and pop. By the age of 37, Vedran was the principal cellist of the prestigious Sarajevo Opera Theater. Looking back on that period years later, Smolovac described the city in those days as the capital of hell. The opera theater had been destroyed, the economy had been shattered, the prospect of ever reuniting the country again dwindled by day. The very definition of human was in question. But then, 4 p.m. on May 27th, 1992, there was a long line of starving, helpless people were shelled as they waited in front of the only bakery in Sarajevo that still had enough flour to make bread. 22 people died in that attack as Vedran Savlovic stood at his apartment building window 100 yards away and watched it happen. The next day, as hungry people knew that if they didn't go to this bakery, they would die. But they also knew if they went to the bakery, they might die. Vedran, dressed in his tuxedo that he would use in playing in the symphony, took his cello and a chair. He sat down in the middle of the rubble in the square, in the midst of that, and played his cello. Scarred by struggle, transformed by hope. Jacob's story of wrestling is an invitation to look again at the struggles of life in order that we might remember how to recognize new life in our souls the next time our hearts turn again to clay, as they surely will.